Hi guys, and welcome to Journey Through to the Centre of the Earth. This is activity 1 for year 9, where we're going to look at the structure of the Earth. Now we know that the Earth is a sphere which is spinning around the Sun and is part of a 9-planet solar system. But if we would take a cross-section of the Earth, what would we see? Well, the Earth is split up into 4 main layers. On the outside we've got the crust. This is then followed by the mantle, the outer core, and finally the inner core. Now, one way I've always tried to explain the structure of the Earth is to think of a hot apple pie. Now, with a hot apple pie, what you'll find is that the outer side, we've got the pastry. Now, the pastry is often cool and it's often solid. However, if you go onto the inside and you go into the fruit of the apple pie, you'll find that it's fairly liquid and it maintains its heat. Well, this isn't too different to what the Earth is like. The apple fruit layer is the lava, the hot molten rock, which is sitting inside the mantle and the outer core in the center of or the middle of the Earth. Then with pastry is the crust on the outside. Now, another way of trying to think of the Earth is the same way as an apple, because what an apple manages to do is give you a rough idea as the number or the amount of distance between each of the layers. Now, if we were to cut an apple in half, we'd see that the outermost layer, which is very, very thin, is the rind. Now, this is identical to what the crust is like. The crust is a hard, solid layer, approximately 100 kilometers thick, although that varies depending on where you are on the planet, and we'll look at that a little later. Then you've got the pith, which basically is the mantle, and then if you take the core of the apple, which has got the seeds in it, that tough sort of layer, you've got the outer core and the inner core combined together. Now, the crust, as we said, is this solid, rigid layer which coats the outside of the Earth, and basically it's what makes up the continents as well as the oceans. Remember, the oceans are just a sea sitting on top of a landmass. Now, at the bottom of the oceans, the crust there will be fairly thin, whereas when you look at the continents, it's going to be a lot thicker. Now, the next slide demonstrates this in a little bit more detail. You can see here that we've got the continental crust, which is incredibly thick, and this starts to shelve as we go into the oceans until we get to the oceanic crust, which is very, very thin. Now, in between the continental crust and the oceanic crust, we've got the continental shelf, and then we've got the continental slope, which drops down into the oceanic floor. Now, the continental shelf is probably what you stand on when you go to the beach, and if you were able to walk out, obviously you go fairly deep, but eventually you would get to a drop-off, and that drop-off would be the continental shelf. Okay, as well as this, we know that we've got 7 main continents. Now, those 7 main continents are made up of North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australasia, and Antarctica. Now, again, don't think about the continents just being the land masses. The continents will go into the oceanic crust as well, and they will form what we call plates, and we will look at these plate movement later on. The next thing, as we go further down into the Earth, is the mantle. Now, you can see here, this is a cross-section of the core. You can see the crust on the top, and the crust is, as we say, a very, very thin layer. Then we get into the mantle. Now, that's denoted by that sort of orange going through to that yellow layer. Fairly hot, around about 1,000 to 2,500 degrees Celsius, and this is going to be made up of a fairly liquid molten layer of rock. Now, right at the very top of the mantle, we've got the lithosphere. That's our crust. As we say, it's very hard and very, very rigid. And then just below that, we've got the asthenosphere, which can be a mixture between a solid or a very jelly-like material. And it's this asthenosphere which is responsible for a lot of the plate tectonics and the movement of the plates, which generate a lot of the phenomenon that we see in forms like earthquakes and volcanoes. Now, we often get a good glimpse of the mantle through portals. Now, these portals we call volcanoes. And this is where the molten lava comes up through cracks in the lithosphere and the top of the crust and pours out onto the surface. And scientists will spend a long time looking at these lava, and it will give us an indication as to what is present lower down in the structure of the Earth. So we've got here molten lava will penetrate the crust through the lithosphere and asthenosphere through volcanoes. Now there are specific points along the plates, which we will see later, where we get these volcanoes, because this is where we're going to get a lot of this lava coming through. Finally, we come down all the way to the core. Now the core, as we know, is a liquid layer of about 2,226 kilometers thick and made up mainly of iron and nickel. And basically this is not solid, it's a fairly fluid layer, and as you can see from the triangle here, it's way down in the Earth's core, right in the center. Now below that we've then got the inner core. Now the inner core is believed to be a nickel iron solid. Now it's believed to be the same temperature of the surface of the Sun, around about 5,430 degrees Celsius, so it's incredibly hot. Now you may say, if it's so hot, why is it a solid? Well, remember, it's got a huge amount of pressure pushing down on it. It's 1,220 kilometers thick, and basically it's spinning. Now this spinning iron core is what gives us our magnetic field and is responsible for a lot of the spinning of the Earth itself. So that gives you a rough idea as to how the structure of the Earth is made up. We've got this thick, rigid crust made up of the lithosphere on the surface. This is insulating the hot magma in the mantle, which is made up at the top of that layer of the asthenosphere, which then moves down into the outer core, which is the liquid iron and nickel layer, and then finally we've got this solid iron nickel core which is spinning. As I say, iron is the predominant element which makes up magnets, and as a result gives us our magnetic fields. So I hope that gives you a rough introduction into the structure of the Earth, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you for watching.